the treason of Benedict Arnold, the capture of Andre, and the intelligence received by Washington through his confidential agents in New York that many of his officers were connected with Arnold, could not fail to arouse the anxiety and vigilance of the commander-in-chief. The moment he reached the army, then under the orders of Major General Greene, encamped in the vicinity of Tappan, he sent for Major Lee, who was posted with the light troops some distance in front. Lee repaired to headquarters and found Washington in his marquee alone, busily engaged in writing. Lee was requested to take a seat, and a bundle of papers lying on the table was given to him for perusal. The purport of these tended to show that Arnold was not alone in his base conspiracy, but that a major general whose name was not concealed was also implicated. This officer had enjoyed, without interruption, the confidence of the commander. Nor did there exist a single reason in support of the accusation. It altogether rested on the intelligence derived from the papers before him. Major Lee was naturally shocked at these suspicions and suggested that they were an invention of the enemy. Washington admitted the plausibility of the suggestion, but remarked that he had the same confidence in Arnold a few days before that he now placed in the persons accused. After some further conversation, Washington disclosed a project which he had maturely revolved in his own mind. He sent for Lee to learn if he had anyone in his corps capable of undertaking a delicate and hazardous enterprise. His object was to probe to the bottom the affecting suspicions suggested by the intelligence and to seize Arnold. The traitorous Arnold was not to be hurt, but that he be permitted to escape if it can be prevented only by killing him, as his public punishment is the only object in view. With these instructions were 2 letters to be delivered as ordered. Lee replied that as the first step to the enterprise was pretended desertion, it would be difficult to find a commissioned officer who would undertake it. He knew, however, a sergeant major of the cavalry named Champe, who was in all respects qualified for the delicate and adventurous project. Champe was a native of Loudoun County in Virginia, about 20 years of age. He had enlisted in 1776, was rather above the common size, full of bone and muscle, with a saturnine countenance, brave, thoughtful and taciturn, of tried courage and inflexible perseverance. Lee promised to persuade him to undertake it, and, taking leave of the general, returned to the camp of the Light Corps. Sending for the sergeant major, he informed him of the project of the commander-in-chief. Champe listened with attention to the plan unfolded by Lee and replied that it met his approbation. Champe added that he was not deterred by the danger and difficulty to be encountered, but by the ignominy of desertion consequent upon his enlisting with the enemy. It did not comport with his feelings to be even suspected of such a crime. Lee commented the objections of the sergeant with his usual address, and finally subdued his prejudices so far that Champe consented to undertake the enterprise. It now remained to arrange the mode of Champe's desertion, for in order to be received favorably by the British, it was necessary that he should desert under circumstances which should assure them of his sincerity. To cross the numerous patrols of horse and foot was no small difficulty. No relief could be afforded by Major Lee, lest it might induce a belief that he was privy to the desertion, which opinion getting to the enemy would peril the life of Champe. The sergeant was left to his own resources and management, Lee agreeing that in case Champe's departure should be discovered before morning, he would take care to delay pursuit as long as possible. Lee placed in the hands of the sergeant some gold for his expenses, and enjoining it upon him to apprise him of his arrival in New York as soon as practicable, bade the adventurous Virginian farewell. Hardly half an hour had elapsed when Captain Khan's officer of the day waited on Major Lee and, with considerable emotion, told him that one of the patrol had fallen in with a dragoon who, on being challenged, put spur to his horse and escaped, though vigorously pursued. The patrol sufficiently distinguished him to know that he was a dragoon, probably from the army, if not, certainly one of his own troops. This idea was ridiculed by Lee as improbable, as, during the whole campaign, but a single dragoon had deserted from the Legion. Khanes was not convinced. Much apprehension was felt at that time of the effect of Arnold's example. The captain withdrew to examine the squadron of horse, whom he had ordered to assemble in pursuance of established usage on similar occasions. He speedily returned, stating that the deserter was known he was no less a person than the sergeant major, who was gone off with his horse, baggage, arms and orderly book, sensibly affected at the supposed baseness of a soldier who was generally esteemed. Carnes added that he had ordered a party to prepare for pursuit and that he had come for written orders from the major. It being at length announced that the pursuing party were in readiness, Major Lee directed a change in the officer, giving the command to Cornet Middleton. His object was to add to the delay. He knew, moreover, that from the tenderness of his disposition, Middleton would be reluctant to do any personal injury to Champe in the event of a pursuit. Within 10 minutes, Middleton appeared to receive his orders, which were delivered to him, made out in the customary form, and signed by the major. The directions were to pursue as far as could be done with safety Sergeant Champe, who was suspected of deserting to the enemy and of having taken the road to Paulus Hook, to bring him alive to camp, so that he might suffer in the presence of the army, but to kill him if he resisted or attempted to escape after being taken. When Middleton departed, it was a few minutes past 12, so that Champe had the start of his pursuers by little more than an hour. As the pursuers ascended in eminence to the north of the village of Bergen, Champe was discovered not more than half a mile in front. The sergeant at the same moment discovered Middleton and his men, and giving spur to his horse, he determined to outstrip them. Champe wisely resolved to abandon his intention of getting to Paulus Hook and to seek refuge from 2 British galleys lying a few miles to the west of Bergen. In the meantime, Middleton, pursuing his course through Bergen, soon arrived when he found that Champe had eluded him. Turning up the road, he inquired of the villagers of Bergen whether a dragoon had been seen that morning preceding his party. He was answered in the affirmative, but could learn nothing satisfactory as to the route taken by the fugitive. Pursuit was now vigorously renewed, and again Champe was described. Apprehending the event, he had prepared himself for it by lashing his valise and orderly book on his shoulders and holding his drawn sword in his hand, having thrown away the scabbard. The delay occasioned by Champe's preparations for swimming had brought Middleton within 200 or 300 yards. As soon as Champe got abreast of the galleys, he dismounted and, running through the marsh to the river, plunged into it, calling on the people in the galley for help. This was readily given. They fired on the horsemen and sent a boat to meet Champe, who was taken in, carried on board, and conveyed to New York with a letter from the captain of the galley, describing the scene which he had himself witnessed of Champe's escape. On the 4th day after Champe's departure, Lee received a letter from him, written the day before without any signature, and stating what had passed after he got on board the galley, where he was kindly received. He was immediately conducted to New York and introduced to the British commandant, to whom he presented a letter from the captain of the galley. Being asked to what cause he belonged and a few other general questions, he was sent under charge of an orderly sergeant to the adjutant general, who was rejoiced to find that he was sergeant major of the Legion of Horse, hitherto remarkable for their fidelity. He was sent to the commander-in-chief in charge of one of the staff. Sir Henry Clinton received him very kindly and detained him more than an hour, asking many questions in regard to the probable fate of André, whether the example of Arnold's defection had not contaminated many of the American officers and troops, whether Washington was popular with the army, and what means might be employed to induce the men to desert. After the close of this long conversation, Sir Henry presented Champe with a couple of guineas and recommended him to wait on General Arnold, who was engaged in raising an American company for the service of His Majesty. Arnold expressed much satisfaction on being informed of the effect of his example and the manner of Champe's escape. He afterward proposed to Champe to join his legion, promising him the same station he had held in the rebel service and further advancement. Expressing his wish to retire from the service and his conviction of the certainty of his being hung if ever taken by the rebels, he begged to be excused from enlistment, assuring the general that should he change his mind, he would accept his offer. Retiring to the assigned quarters, Champe now turned his attention to the delivery of his letters, which he could not effect till the next night, and then only to one of the 2 incogniti to whom he was recommended. This man received the sergeant with attention, and having read the letter, assured him of his faithful cooperation. The object for which the aid of this individual was required regarded those persons implicated in the information sent to Washington. A day or 2 afterward, Champe accepted the appointment of recruiting sergeant to Arnold for the purpose of securing uninterrupted ingress and egress at the house which the general occupied. The letters which Lee received from Champe announced that the difficulties in his way were numerous and stubborn, and that his prospect of success was by no means cheering. With respect to the charges against certain officers and soldiers in the American Army of an intention to follow Arnold's example, he expressed his decided conviction that they were unfounded. The interposition of Sir Henry Clinton, who was extremely anxious to save André, much loved aide-de-camp, still continued. It was expected that the examination of witnesses in André's case and the defense of the prisoner would protract the decision of the Court of Inquiry then assembled and give sufficient time for the consummation of the project confided to Champe. This hope was disappointed in a manner wholly unexpected. The honorable and accomplished André disdained defense and prevented the examination of witnesses by confessing the character of the mission. In the execution of which he was arrested, the court reassembled on the 2nd of October. André was declared to be a spy and condemned to suffer accordingly. The painful sentence was executed on the subsequent day. In the usual form, the commander-in-chief, deeming it improper to interpose any delay, nothing now remained but to attempt the seizure of Arnold. To this object, Champe gave his undivided attention. 10 days elapsed before he could conclude his arrangements, at the end of which time Lee received from him his final communication, appointing the 3rd subsequent night for a party of dragoons to meet him at Hoboken, when he hoped to deliver Arnold to the officer. From the moment of his enlistment into Arnold's corps, Champe had every opportunity he could desire for watching the habits of that individual. He discovered that it was his custom to return home about 12 every night, and that, previous to going to bed, he generally walked in his garden. The appointed day arrived, and Lee with a party of dragoons left camp late in the evening. From the tenor of the last communication from Champe, no doubt was entertained of the success of the enterprise. The party from the American camp reached Hoboken about midnight, where they were concealed in the adjoining wood. Hour after hour passed, no boat approached. At length the day broke, and the major retired with his party back to the camp, much chagrined at the failure of the project. In a few days, Lee received an anonymous letter from Champe's patron and friend informing him that on the day preceding the night for the execution of the plot, Arnold had removed his quarters to another part of the town to superintend the embarkation of troops preparing for an expedition to be placed under his own direction. The American company, consisting chiefly of American deserters, had been transferred from the barracks to one of the transports, it being apprehended that if left on shore till the expedition was ready, many of them might desert. Thus it happened that John Champe, instead of crossing the Hudson that night, was safely deposited on board one of the transports, from which he never departed till the troops under Arnold landed in Virginia. Nor was he able to escape from the British Army till after the junction with Lord Cornwallis, when he deserted, and passing through Virginia and North Carolina, safely joined the American Army. Champe's appearance excited extreme surprise among his former comrades, which was not a little increased when they witnessed the cordial reception which he met with from the late Major, now Lieutenant Colonel Lee. His whole story soon became known to the Corps, and he became an object of increased respect and regard. Champe was munificently rewarded, and General Washington gave him a discharge from further service, lest, in the vicissitudes of war, he might fall into the enemy's hands, in which event, if recognized, he could expect no mercy.